Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful. Hello and welcome to On Farm. I'm Anna Davis and thank you as always for joining us. As we come out of lockdown and the sun starts to shine, thoughts for many of us, certainly for me anyway, turn to travel, holidays and doing whatever we can to get out of the house. Bookings for UK holidays went up by 300% in 2020, according to an article in the Independent newspaper. Whilst this is at least partly driven by uncertainty around foreign holidays and travel rules, bookings for UK holidays were already rising by over 10% per year long before COVID struck. Another piece of research from Booking.com suggests that nearly half of us plan to spend more of our holiday time in our home country in future. All this amounts to an opportunity for those of us running farm businesses, often in some of the most beautiful and coveted parts of Scotland. So this episode is for you if you've ever wondered about how you would start agritourism on your farm, whether it's offering bed and breakfast, converting a barn to a bunkhouse, or putting in bell tents to start a glamping offer. We have got useful advice for you. We have with us experts from two companies, Douglas Hume & Co, chartered accountants and tax experts who advise farms and rural businesses on how to make the most of their assets, and also FBRSeed, surveyors and land agents with a big focus on farm and estate management and diversification. I won't say too much about them now, I'll let them introduce themselves at the start of the chat.
I'm Sheryl Macaulay. I'm one of the directors at Douglas Hume & Co, chartered accountants and tax advisors. Our main office is in Kelso and we have offices all around the borders, Edinburgh and North England. I've been with the firm since 2002, so nearly 20 years, and became a director, about 9 years ago. My main job in the firm is to do tax planning for our clients, so inheritance tax, capital gains tax, income tax. That is the more exciting parts of the accountancy and tax world.
Thank you, Sheryl. Now, obviously, this is a podcast, so people can't see you, but you really do not look old enough to have been working there for 20 odd years. That's unbelievable. But thank you. David, if you could also do the same thing, please, and tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm the managing director of FBRSeed, which is a merger of two companies a year ago, FBR from Kelso and Seed & Co from Duns. And we employ about 30 people and look after land, property and buildings for clients all over Scotland, but mainly in the southeast and up into the Lothians. And I'm also a farmer with as a family farming partnership. All of that keeps me gainfully employed all of the time. I also am far too young looking, although you can't see me, I'm far too young looking to have done this for about 35 or 40 years, obviously.
You took the words right out of my mouth there, David. I was also thinking, you obviously don't have very much time to twiddle your thumbs because it sounds like you've got plenty, like you said, to keep you occupied.
I still try to find plenty of time to do lots of pastimes in the area here, shooting and fishing and all the different things. So I still do try to get a good balance, and I think I'm a reasonable delegator, which is always a useful skill to learn for anybody. Definitely, yes.
I think I've only semi-mastered that skill myself, so you might have to give me some tips later on. What have you noticed over the last few years from speaking to various clients and even just chatting to friends and neighbours about the idea of on-farm tourism?
Well, you're completely right. Over the last few years, this sector of the diversified business, for farms has grown hugely. And in the last year and this year, it's continuing in this sort of hundreds of percent in increase due to not being able to go abroad. And so, it's a massive opportunity. But even before 2020 and COVID, many farms and estates and other landowners were trying to expand into this market, and glamping had become very popular. We have many clients and many friends who have farms and bits of land in Scotland and all over the UK who are trying to benefit from this and get on and start something up. Diversification, it's actually just looking at the opportunities that come along and working out how you can benefit from them.
According to the Independent newspaper, the number of UK holiday bookings rose by a whopping 300% in 2020, presumably as an almost direct result of COVID and the inability of people to travel abroad. But actually, as you said, David, even before COVID, bookings for holidays within the UK were still rising by at least 10% per year. So it sounds very exciting. It is very exciting, and it creates an opportunity for many businesses. But we can't, any of us, just wake up one day and decide, right, that's it. As of today, I'm now a tourism operator. Sheryl, a question for you, really. There are so many considerations when looking at projects like this, but for most people, the primary one has to be financial. Can I afford this? What financial implications are there? And am I going to make a profit? I suppose are the key questions. This is a biggie for you, I suppose, in terms of a question. But, where should people's thinking start when they've got this seed of an idea when it comes to the financials behind it?
Planning is absolutely the key, because if you have the right stepping stones in the beginning, then it's a lot easier. If you get it wrong and have to unravel and restructure and things in the future, it can be a bit of a nightmare. So planning is absolutely key. You have to think about all taxes when you come to look at a kind of new project. It might seem that it's a great opportunity for income tax. However, it may have a knock-on effect to inheritance tax or capital gains tax. So it's really important that you look across all taxes and VAT as well, because that can always be one to watch out for. It really depends who's going to be involved in the project. So you may have one generation of farmers and the new generation coming up. Is it the new generation that's project? Are they going to take this project on their own? Where's the money coming from? Do they have to borrow the money? Who's going to borrow the money? And as you say, is it going to make any money? So it's really important that you kind of look at cash flows and see where how much this is going to cost. What's the likely income streams that you're going to get from it, and is there anything to watch out for?
Sometimes the agricultural sector or the rural sector can be a bit private, I suppose, and we can't blame them, but. Are there any models or any kind of public case studies, as it were, that you're aware of that people can essentially follow? These are the steps that I need to follow when thinking about the financials for creating a self-catering business or a glamping site, or is that something that very much needs to be done on an individual basis?
I would say it's on an individual basis, because every farming family will be different. Just because your neighbour next door is doing it one way doesn't mean to say it's going to be right for you. As I say, it's really important to plan and to speak to people like myself and David to ensure that you've got off on the right foot.
David, if we're sort of thinking of somebody's got an idea, they want to say they've got an old steading building and they want to convert it into 3 self-catering cottages, for an example. What's the very first thing they need to do? Do they need to sit down and have a meeting with somebody like yourself and with their accountant round a table? Obviously, that's a bit more challenging these days. It might be a Zoom call. What's the very first thing to do once you've had this brainwave of an idea?
It's just interesting today, because actually I was reading this morning, the headline in today's papers of the farm incomes have fallen by a third in the last year. So the pressure is really on. We've got the Brexit situation looming, to come to reality in a few years' time, when we're looking at, subsidies disappearing, and people really need to think of what they're going to do. And, most people will be listening to this, and most farmers, a lot of people have already diversified or thought about it, and they've got a good idea of what they should do. But if you haven't thought about it and you're thinking, let's try and either jump on the bandwagon for this year I mean, I would say that the first thing is to look at what you've got. Don't just commit yourself to, you've got an old building. Look at what your resources are and see if there's things that are underutilized in terms of either buildings or land or people or whatever. But you also need to be careful right at the start. I mean, when you hear these statistics about farm incomes falling, you've got to make sure that your core business is absolutely perfectly run as best as it can be, because a business that's not going well won't go any better if you add something else onto it. You've got to get that bit right first. And then I would say at the moment, it's almost like a two-tier opportunity. The long-term glamping, self-catering or any sort of, on-farm holiday staycation things, you really need to plan them really carefully. You need a business plan, you need marketing, you need to know what you need to do with change of use and all your local authority situations, your insurance, how it's going to affect having all these people going around that you're not used to having. And so I think actually there's a real opportunity this year, which is something that people can latch on to quite quickly, because the one thing that has changed is that there's a 28-day rule in Scotland and all of the UK, actually, where you're allowed to have temporary structures for up to 28 days without having planning in place. Now, last year and this year, that's been changed. In England, it's become the 56-day rule, and in Scotland, it's just become a very loosely based thing, where basically you can put up a temporary structure like a tent or a coffee shop or something like that and operate that, and the local authority, under the instruction of the Scottish Government, are to let it continue to try and help the situation. Now, I think there's a real opportunity this year for people who are thinking they fancy a bit of staycation, they fancy investing in the longer term, and they want to convert the building and look at all that. It's a good chance to do something on a smaller scale and find out how much you like having a whole bunch of strangers walking about your farm, potentially leaving litter, doing things you might not like. How do you fancy checking people in on a Saturday afternoon every week, cleaning things out and getting them ready for the next lot coming in, handling the bookings, the complaints, the issues that come along? And I think there's a real opportunity this year for people to try and do that, because if you go for planning and you try to do the bigger, longer term operation, that invariably will take you months. You've got to do the business plan properly. You've got to do the planning. You've got to get things in place. So you're effectively not going to start that operation till sometime next year. And you don't really want to miss out on this year where there's this huge growth. The other thing we don't know is this massive increase going to continue into next year and the years to come? The number of people putting in staycation opportunities has increased hugely. And when the holiday market goes back to a more normal situation, will these people continue to holiday at home, or might you have something that is hard to fill and you've got to cut prices? So a lot of thinking to be done and lots of research to be done. And I think that one of the issues in Scotland and all the UK is you've got lots of tenanted farms, which have as big a difficulty as any in trying to diversify. But you need to get permission from your landlord to diversify into anything, and you can't just start putting up some tents and invite 20 lots of people along to come and stay. So you have to think about that too, and that is something I would advise you get specialist advice on that, because you could get yourself into trouble pretty quickly by irritating the lease, and that is something that can be avoided by talking with your landlord or your landlord's agent or people like ourselves in advance.
Thank you, David. Yeah, that was very interesting. And it sounds like you've got a couple of dogs barking in the background. You may be like me and you've got deliveries coming every 5 minutes, and then the dogs start going and you can't keep them quiet. But I like to have a bit of genuine noise in the background of our podcast, so I'm glad to hear them.
That is Buzz and Lulu, who are very, very small dachshunds, but they've got this huge bark on them, which they bark at everything and everybody. They're
guard dogs. Very scary guard dogs.
Scary, yep.
Yeah. Look, we've heard anecdotally that people listen to these podcasts because they want to learn something. And you've taught me something already, because I did not know about the 28-day rule in terms of the relaxation. So, as you said, that is particularly relevant this summer, because whilst we do like to be positive, we have to be a bit realistic here. And I suppose everybody has to think, don't they, that setting up any kind of on-farm tourism requires hard work. And as you alluded to, it requires working on a Saturday. It requires managing staff potentially. It requires cleaning loos. We've got to be realistic that it's difficult. And so to have the opportunity to give it a try this year sounds like a really valuable opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that farmers don't work on a Saturday, because we know plenty of them and they work,
of course,
all the hours that there are. The point is, though, in our own management business, we look after many caravan and camping sites and glamping sites and holiday accommodation. We've helped to set up many successful camping and on-farm catering and all sorts of different things throughout the whole of Scotland. And not everyone is a success, and not everybody enjoys the process once they get there. So I think the hardest thing will be in April, where we are now, trying to source 10 bell tents and all the things that go with them. I think the waiting list for that is huge, and I think the opportunities are harder to find now. But however, having said that, you can open up a field and cut the grass and have an access and a parking space where people can bring their own tents and their own cycling equipment and just sort of self-manage. And that gives you a bit of a taste of it. I mean, a lot of farms in Scotland are subject to tenancies, and tenants do need to be able to diversify too. Now, there is a method to do that. You notify your landlord, and it takes about 70 days, and a process is gone through. But to do this quickly, you wouldn't be able to do that and get the wave of this market this year. And so therefore, the best thing to do is to speak to your landlord's agent, and get them to agree, okay, try it and see how you get on, or find out if they even are going to let you do it. Because the last thing you want to do is suddenly have 10 tents in your paddock behind your house and find that you've irritated the lease and you're in bother, and you don't want that to happen. So it's important that people take good advice and think in advance and look at all the possible downsides. We are very positive, and we always want people to do well, and we want people to go in with their eyes wide open, and that is an important thing in something like this. So it's a good chance this year, potentially.
Definitely. I think, try before you buy, in essence, I guess. Sheryl, we've probably got two scenarios here, haven't we? We've got the long-term scenario. Somebody might be doing have a long-term view of some self-catering cottages, for example. But just for the meantime, because David's raised this really interesting and very valid issue of how can people take advantage of summer 2021, which is just round the corner. So from a tax point of view, what do people need to do for this short-term project, first of all, then?
I think if it was just for, as you say, a trial this summer, then to keep things simple, it would probably best just to keep it within the normal farming structure and run it through there. It's only going to be for the 50 days or whatever David mentioned there, so it's not a long term position. So I would, rather than complicate anything, I would just use that time and run it through the original structure that you have in place.
But imagine for a second, and we hope that people find it successful, they get customers through the door, they decide, actually, I think this is for me, I'm going to set up a permanent shower block, or I might purchase some bell tents for longer term use, or I might convert some farm buildings into a hostel or some more luxury self-catering, whatever it might be. I mean, gosh, for me, we've actually done a similar project on our farm. And I remember this 2018, kind of sitting down thinking, where do we start here? We're going to have to borrow some money to do this. The builders are arriving, they'll be charging VAT. Can we claim VAT back? And then when we've got people arriving to occupy the buildings, do we have to charge them VAT? I just remember, I'm not a financial person at all, and I remember just feeling a bit bamboozled. So from your perspective, what should people do straight away? They decide that this is definitely for them. What do they need to do when it comes to the figures? Because we don't want people to feel overwhelmed and scared before they've even got going.
Yeah, so you need to work out how much it's going to cost you initially, and more often than not, it costs more than you ever think it's going to. So you need to kind of build in that kind of buffer. The structure of it is important. So if you've got perhaps a family farming partnership? Do you want it within the family farming partnership or a separate entity? Whether that's another partnership with different partners, or a small limited company, or maybe just a simple sole trader. The VAT point comes into force there. So the farm will be VAT registered. Do you really want these bell tents or lodges or whatever to be VAT registered as well? Holiday lets are standard rated for VAT, so if you are VAT registered, then you must charge VAT onto your customers. And when your customers are just human beings and individuals, that's an extra cost to them. So that if you're running it through the usual partnership, you will have to consider the VAT there. If you set up a new structure and the income's going to be under the VAT threshold, it can be separate and you wouldn't need to register necessarily. However, if you don't register, then you're not able to claim any of the VAT back on the kind of purchase or the renovations. And then in that case, you'd need to look at what VAT rates would be applicable to what you're doing. So, if you're renovating a property, there may be lower rates of VAT applicable depending on the building. VAT is a minefield when it comes to property, but if you're renovating an old building that's never been lived in for a long time, then you can perhaps have the lower rates of 5% rather than 20%. So again, it's bringing that into the equation as well. When you're looking at costings and holiday lets, you can claim capital allowances on holiday lets. So everybody will probably know you can claim a capital allowance on a tractor or a combine, but when it comes to property, there's lots of things within the properties that you can claim capital allowances on. And again, it's bringing that tax relief into the kind of costings, if you like. Mainly you're looking at plumbing, electricity. The bell tents are an odd one when it comes to capital allowances. If they're going to be up all year round, then probably not. But if you're putting them up and taking them down and moving them around the farm, then you could possibly get capital allowances on the full amount of the tent. So again, it's looking at the various options available to you. Are you renovating a property or are you putting tents up? Because again, it would be completely different. And just looking again at all the taxes in the round. Mentioned at the beginning, it might be great for income tax. You might get a great income. You've got lots of allowances, so your tax liability on them might be very small. However, holiday lets are always questionable when it comes to inheritance tax and in particular business property relief. So you might have a farm that's absolutely fine. You've got APR, you've got BPR, and your inheritance tax position's looking great. You suddenly put a holiday cottage on there, and it could tip the scale and create that your farming business is no longer farming. It's more investment, and that's the last thing you would want to do. So it's very important that you look at inheritance tax when you come to new projects. And having one cottage is probably going to be fine, but if you start looking at a caravan site or something like that, you have to be very careful.
Yeah, David, that the inheritance tax situation is really interesting, I think, particularly in relation to something you said earlier, which is that often, not always, but often it's perhaps the younger generation who have this idea to do something different and expand out beyond farming. But they may have the idea, but it may not be the younger generation that's currently holding the reins of the business. There might be a whole kind of succession thing to consider, as well as the inheritance tax when that farm passes on. What advice would you have for people when it comes to not family disputes, that's too strong a word, but family arrangements, I suppose, because let's face it, not everybody in a family might think that a glamping site is a good idea.
Yeah, well, inheritance and succession is a massive subject all of its own. But I think that in the whole process of deciding, on something like a staycation or a glamping or an on-farm diversification, you can take that into account when you set the business up, and you can have a separate legal entity that is operated by some other family member who really have a desire to to run a holiday business, and the old grumpy farmer like me doesn't want to do that. He just wants to sit in his tractor and go up and down the field. And the last thing you want is all the GP, as we call them, the general public, going around generally upsetting your life or seeing them as a nuisance or whatever. So quite often the best thing you can do in that situation, which will also help in succession planning is to have something completely separate, that whoever's doing it has responsibility for it. Lots of people talk about, how you get on to the succession situation. And part of the problem is that people having an income to live off once they do that, but also having been able to prove themselves to do what it is that requires to be done in terms of the looking after the property and making a profit and running the whole thing, So these new businesses within an existing business can be a really good starting point to get that succession running. And also you quite often have more than one family member who wants to be involved in the family business, and this gives them a chance to do that. And there are many different ways to set that up with, different sort of partnerships and company structures and rental situations that you can do so that they make it a bit easier. One other thing that I was going to mention, which is just to put into the mix at the moment, on the 1st of April this year, there was a change to which people might know about, the change to the general permitted development rules. It's now possible to develop an existing agricultural building into a residential property with up to 150 square metres without planning permission. The same also goes to an existing agricultural building, can be turned into flexible commercial use up to 500 square metres of floor space, again for things like farm shops or for vending machines or for some indoor activities. And all of these things can be done without getting to the formal planning. And so you just have to write to the local authority. They've got 28 days to reply to you. If they don't reply, you assume you can do it. The only caveat to that is it does not apply where buildings are listed. If you've got listed buildings on your farm, say a traditional stone and slate building, you cannot just convert that. That has to go through full planning, and that can be more expensive how you renovate that listed building anyway. But ordinary steel portal sheds or existing farm buildings can be converted without consent. So that's a really useful widening of the rules to make it easier for people to operate. So that's something to consider at the moment as well, because you can actually do something quite quickly, relatively, if you had the right building to maybe catch part of this market this year. Subject to doing a proper business plan and working out whether it's sensible and all the other things that go with it, of which there are many.
Yes, and again, David, something else I didn't know, that could shave a lot of time off getting started with a project and potentially some cost as well of the whole planning, having to go through planning. So that's really interesting. You've touched in particular, although it won't only apply to tenants, but you've touched in particular to tenants, David, who sometimes find it more difficult to borrow money in order to be able to do these make any infrastructure changes, because they perhaps have fewer assets that they can borrow against. For both of you, what would considerations be if you've got this project but you don't just have the money sitting in your back pocket ready to pay for it, and that you actually need to find a way to borrow the money?
Well, your first part of your question about tenant farmers, and they do have a little bit of an issue when it comes to access to funds. They don't often have enough things to secure loans against, whereas landowners and farmers who own their own land can relatively straightforwardly, with a decent business plan and a proposition as to what they want to do, can borrow quite easily. And just to point, we are also AMC agents, and as such, we have the ability to put these applications together for people. You can generally borrow up to 60% loan to value for a project that can give you a good return. So subject to many other financial things that you need to look at, if you've got a few hundred acres that these days are worth several £1,000s per acre, you can soon borrow the money, and interest rates at the moment are historically low. From a tenant's point of view, it is more difficult. If you're purely a tenant and you've got no asset to borrow against, it is more difficult, and you have to find the funds elsewhere. Now, there are things at the moment. Again, you've got COVID bounce back loans, you've got startup loans, you've got loads of opportunities coming along where for once in a long time, people who do not have the ability to underwrite these with banks can put together a loan application and get funds they couldn't normally get. So now is the time to look at that. I mean, the The bounce back loan has just ended at the end of last month, but I think the new startup loans are coming out. So keep an eye on all that. And again, it's just taking advice and speaking to the professionals who are, we're at the sharp end, Sheryl and ourselves are at the sharp end of this all the time. We have to know what's coming out every day at the moment. We have to learn the rules, look at what changes, and make sure we can advise our clients properly. And, if you take the right advice and look at what's out there, it's amazing what you can source, and it's amazing what you can do.
Yeah, Sheryl, I'd love to hear your viewpoint on that as well, because, if somebody has a really, really brilliant idea and it's backed up by a sound business plan, I think it would be heartbreaking if then they weren't able to fund it to take it forward. So what are your thoughts and advice on how to make it happen, as it were, from a financial point of view?
Yeah, so again, I think the structure is important here, because obviously if it's within the main farming structure, it's probably a lot easier to get the funding. If the next generation come through and set up a new limited company or such like, it may be a bit more difficult for them to get the funding, and it may have to be, it may have to come via the farm to make that work. So again, it's discussions with the likes of David and making sure, who can actually get the money. If you can't get it yourself, is there a way around that, and just try our hardest to get them the money. They're hope, if it is a sound business plan, you would hope somebody out there would lend. But again, as David says, that there is a lot of loan funding out there at the moment which is that should be a little bit easier to get your hands on. You're doing it to try and promote your business a bit more, and another income stream, and get more people to the countryside, and so there is a good story there to tell. So it's just trying to make sure that the story's the best it can be to get the money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking from personal experience, one of the well-known banks wasn't interested in our project at all, and we felt a bit downhearted by that. Another of the equally well-known banks couldn't have been more enthusiastic. So actually, if you don't succeed first time, it doesn't mean that your idea is bad. It might just mean that it doesn't fit with the lending priorities of that particular bank. So yeah, give it another go would be my advice, because if you've got a sound business plan that you and your accountant is convinced is going to be successful, then, as you say, somebody somewhere will be willing to and keen to get behind that and support you.
There's lots of other funding bodies out there rather than the main banks now. There is a lot of variety out there. It's just knowing where to go, and the likes of us can help with that.
We also have a situation down here in the borders. We now have the South of Scotland Enterprise, which we have never had before. We have access potentially to funds in the border lands that never were available before. It's very similar to what they used to have in the Highlands and Islands Development Fund. And so, I know of one caravan and camping site that's just been given funding for their infrastructure. And there are many things that, if you've got confidence in your business plan and you definitely want to do it and you're a determined person, you can get the funding and you can make it happen and make it happen successfully. That's having the confidence in what you want to do and making sure that people, if you can't find the right person on day one, don't give up. You'll find somebody, and there's plenty of opportunities if you think about it a bit harder, look a bit harder. It's amazing what you can do.
Very true. There's a phrase or a quote that's been following me around all of this week. I've read it 3 times in 3 separate places, which in itself is a bit freaky, but it was Henry Ford, I think, who said it originally, and it's, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're probably right. So it's sometimes it's about determination and doing the right thing and planning, and if you really have everything stacked up behind you, you can make it happen.
There's a very good one that's been going around from Charles Darwin's. It's not the strongest or the fittest that survive. It's those that can adapt. They're the ones that survive. And that is not an exact quote. It's a sort of it's the right words, but in a different order.
That could not be more true, I think, within the farming sector. Over recent weeks, we've talked about climate change and weather and all sorts of things on the podcast. And the common theme, whether it comes to diversification in new projects or whether it comes to weather that you can't control, is you have to be adaptable, otherwise you can't survive.
I'd just like to reiterate that speaking to people in the first instance is the most important thing. Don't just rush off and do an idea. Speak to people first. Planning is the absolute key. You need to make sure that you've got off on the right foot.
Yeah, quite right. And David, what do you think? What else do people need to be hearing from us at this stage?
Well, once you've done your business plan, got your funding, decided you definitely want to do it, you then got to look at the sort of operational aspects of what you're doing and how that's going to work. So making sure your resources are properly. Look at your insurance. Your insurance policy for your farm will change considerably. You suddenly take you on a big risk. The general public coming on, they trip over things, they fall into things, they turn up in places they shouldn't be, and so on. You get litter, the cattle eat, and you get a plastic bag that gets eaten by a cow in a silage field. Things like that happen. You've got to be prepared for things that are not always going to go as swimmingly as you want. There's also the marketing and the booking. There's going to be a huge number of these sites out there all over the country. You've got to make sure your product gets to the top of the search engines and top of the list so people see it. And you've got to get all your social media sorted out. You've got to learn all about that. You've got to work out your whole marketing strategy, your booking platform, get it as full as it can be, and then look to how you can diversify your diversification to make it all the add-ons that go with it, and horse riding and farm walks and farm tours, and it's endless. It becomes an endless thing that just grows and grows if you get it right.
Thank you to David and to Sheryl for such great and comprehensive advice. If you're thinking of starting an agritourism business, hopefully that set you on the right track and given you some information that will be really useful. Or maybe you weren't thinking of doing anything like that before listening and the chat has inspired you to start thinking about it. But either way, thank you for joining us and I hope you found it useful. Douglas Hume & Co are chartered accountants and tax experts with 8 offices throughout Scotland and Northern England. As you've heard in the episode, they are extremely good at helping rural businesses make the most of their assets and being proactive about things like tax efficiency, succession planning and a host of other services. FBRSeed are specialist rural surveyors and land agents offering unrivalled expertise in farm and estate management and an extensive working knowledge of rural business assets. Again, that expertise is very clear from the chat that we've just had. Huge thanks, as always, to everyone who likes, shares and promotes on-farm episodes on social media and elsewhere. Please do keep telling people about us and obviously particularly share this episode with anyone thinking of getting involved in agritourism. Our usual reminder before we go that On Farm is made by the team at Scene&HerdPR and Marketing. If you need a new brand, logo, website, social media management or advice on any type of communications, we are people to speak to, so do just get in touch. Thank you again for listening and we shall see you next time.